Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech Stack workshops brought to you by King's Entrepreneurship Lab, eLab for short, an initiative of King's College at the University of Cambridge. My name is Zaria, and I'm one of the senior associates here at eLab. I graduated from Cambridge in 2023 and am now doing a PhD at the London School of Economics. Besides these workshops, I run the large language models in Law Hackathon, where students spend a day building software solutions for real world legal problems and can win up to £10,000. Last year, we ran technical workshops the day before the hack, and pretty much all the teams ended up using these tools, leading to far more ambitious projects than we'd ever seen before. Which made us realize if we only show students what tools are out there, we can empower them to take the most crucial, yet the hardest first step in turning their ideas into reality. Which is what ultimately led us to this workshop series. It's designed to familiarize you with the tools that can enable or accelerate your venture building and hopefully help you take that first step into your founder journey. Today's session is all about Cursor, an AI coding tool that helps you write, understand, debug, and improve code using LLMs, large language models, directly in your coding environment. So the LLM understands your entire project, not just the small snippet that you managed to copy paste into ChatGPT. Cursor is built by Anysphere, one of the hottest startups right now, having raised $900 million at a $9 billion valuation last May. So we're beyond excited to have Joel Alexander with us. He'll give us a brief overview of Cursor, explain how it can work best for you, show you how to access it in the most cost-efficient way, especially if you're a student, and leave some time at the end for your questions. With that, Joel, I'll hand the floor to you and we can start.
Thanks, Sadia. Hey everyone, I'm Joel. I'm part of the field engineering team here at Cursor. And so my role is essentially to help all the customers that we work with understand Cursor's features, how to become power users. I also like to learn from our own power users, see how they're using Cursor. And before Cursor, I did Y Combinator, so I was running my own company. And I used Cursor a lot then as well. And so obviously I bring a lot of that experience to the table on, how I use Cursor as an engineer myself.
Amazing. Oh, okay.
Great. Should I go directly into my presentation?
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. So as I continue to present here, I'll also be watching the Q&A as well. So definitely feel free to keep it interactive. I want to make sure that I'm answering the questions that you have and kind of guiding things in a way that makes more sense to you. So just to level set, right? As we may know, Cursor is a fork of VS Code. So that means that we took the open source repository of VS Code and then we started building on top of that. And so it is not a plugin or an extension. And so if you go to the top section here in Cursor after you download it, you can look at the About Cursor section to know what version of Cursor you're on, as well as what version of VS Code you're on. If you're used to using VS Code as an engineer, your extensions also, you should be able to get them here. We have two different marketplaces, and so we try to get most of the extensions and make sure those are available also. Outside of that, one other thing I like to do always at the beginning is top right is your settings. You should click here to check all the settings that you have to make sure this matches what you want. Most importantly, the models. So here you can have a list of all the models that you want to have enabled. These will cover, Claude, GPTs, Geminis, the latest Grok models, whatever you like. And so you can check off any of these. Models with a brain next to them are thinking models, right? And those without the thinking brain are just normal models. Thinking models, I'll show you how that looks in the UI. They kind of like, interact with themselves first before responding. So what we're working with here is a monorepo. It has a backend that's in Python and a front end that's in TypeScript. And this is powering this simple application here. This is a finance dashboard. I provide a ticker. It gives me a company overview, as well as some financials, right? And what I want to do today is add a price chart to this page as well. So before doing that, I wanted to show you some of the kind of core features of Cursor and how to think about using it correctly. So the first thing that we built was called Tab. Tab is like our autocomplete. And so if I start typing in here, create user, and if I press enter, it's going to start thinking about what I want to do. And if I press tab, it's going to start completing that for me, right? So now it's starting to get a hang of what I want to do. And so it just adds those. So that's the tab model. Tab is interesting because it's not like your traditional kind of autocomplete that's just looking at, what was before your kind of your cursor. It's looking at everything that you've done. And so it is learning as you interact with the code, and it's learning across files. And so it's learning the intent of what you want to do. So as you're interacting with cursor, this tab model is going to get more and more powerful. So that brings us now to the next core feature that you'll use, which is going to be the agent. And so the agent is a LLM model that has the ability to both read code as well as write, so create files, and kind of interact with the code base for you and run terminal commands. And so before we jump into that, let's think about what does it mean to really interact with and write code with a LLM. It has two core components. The first is the model, and the second is context. So the model is anything from, your OpenAI models, your GPTs to your Claude models, right? Those we can't change, right? The model has been trained already, and that's set in stone. And so if we want to impact the quality of those outputs, what we need to do is impact what the model is aware of, the context. So that's where Cursor focuses its energy on context. The first way we do that is by indexing your code base. So when you open Cursor and you open up a folder, all of these files, we index them, right? So that means that we simply take all this information and we turn it into like a vector, which is like a number. And then whenever you ask another question, we try to figure out, is there any semantic similarity between your question and snippets of code that exist in your code base? We automatically add that to the context of the LLM, right? And for those who might not be aware, context just means the memory of the LLM, right? So you can imagine it as like a chat conversation. And so all the previous messages, that's information that goes into the context of the LLM. The more information you put into that context, the better the LLM can answer your question. And so that's how that part is going to work. The next thing is going to be adding context yourself. And so there are a few ways you can do that. You can use the @ symbol, right? If you use the @ symbol, you can directly add files and folders to your context. So if I say main.py is now in the context of my LLM. You can drag files into this window, right? And that would work just fine. And you can even upload images, right, for any of the models that support images. And then the next thing we have here is what we call rules. And so when you start Cursor, you won't see this .cursor folder. So you'll create this yourself, right? By just clicking new folder, you'll add this. Then you can add a rules folder. And inside that, you can add instructions that you want. And so these rules tend to be anything that as you're interacting with this agent, you might find it makes mistakes that you don't like, or maybe you just want it to, do something else. Like you can tell it to talk like a pirate, for example, right? The rules are just things that guide the model to interact with you the way you want to be interacted with, or to write code in a way that you want it to write code. And so for me, for example, at the top level here, I create the system design guidance rules. And so in this, I've read a bunch of articles on like, great system design best practices, and I've just dropped that information into this markdown file. And now I can say, hey, always apply this rule, which means that this information, this text is always going to be in the context window. You can also make rules nested. And so here in my backend folder, I have rules that are specific for Python files, right? And so here I say apply to specific files, and then you see it says only Python files, and that information will be here as well. So let's see. Let me checking the Q&A really quickly.
There's a question from Joe who's saying that he won the hackathon last time as a part of an all non-technical group. And at the time, they used Gemini and ChatGPT. So he's guessing Cursor would be better for app building. What basics courses would you recommend they study or get certified in to be able to make optimum use of Cursor to bring them as close as possible to someone who's a computer scientist or a coder?
So that's an interesting question, right? How do you learn how to make the best use of cursor? The key way to learn how to use AI in general is to use it more, right? Because you start to understand how it answers your questions. In our case, they're going to be coding questions, but if you open ChatGPT, right, it'll be the questions that you ask. And by interacting with it, you start to understand, okay, how can I get it to do what I want? I'll kind of talk on some general tips and tricks on how to prompt the model, but really it's going to be something that you build taste for, right? I don't know if you guys are on like X or Twitter. There's a lot of talk on like, you need to have taste. And that just means that as you interact, you learn to say, what does good look like for me? Right. And the better your idea of what good looks like, the better you can guide the model into that decision. And the way you guide it is by doing things that impact the context window. So rules and adding context with the at symbol and just general prompting. And for the .edu, I'll talk about this at the end. If it doesn't work with a non.edu, let me know, and I'll talk to the team and see if we can kind of whitelist some of these other domains. And maybe you guys can send me some and we can add that to the whitelist.
Yeah, we'll be talking about how to access the cursor in the most cost-effective way at the very end.
Okay, so now let's add a price chart. I like to manage, my features using one of these kind of ticket managers. And so ticket manager keeps all the information that I want to implement for my feature. Here I'm using linear and I want to add this price chart. So I have a description of what this task entails. So the first thing many people try to do is let's imagine this is either something you wrote yourself or you just have just the first part at a price chart. Usually you want to just drop that in there and then you want to press enter, right? This is like what Vibe Coding 101 says to do. It says you give the model a task to do and it tries to finish everything in one shot. This is actually not the best way to get quality responses. The best way to do that is going to be to ask the model to make a plan. Luckily, we've just added a new feature called plan mode. So now if you go here, agent mode, like I said, that allows the model to read and write code. We have ask mode. This allows the model to read, but not write. So you can use it to ask questions. And we just added plan mode. And so what plan mode is going to do is it's going to look at your requirements and then it's going to start to explore the code base to figure out what's the most important context that I need. And then it's going to kind of go back to you and ask for any follow-up clarification questions. And you'll have this ability to go back and forth, and then it will start building. So let's see how that looks. So here I switched to the Claude 4.5 model. I like to think about it this way. When I'm planning, I want to use the strongest model, right? Use all the intelligence at the plan phase. And then when I'm implementing, I want to switch back to auto because auto is going to be cheap. And so if you guys do get that kind of Cursor Pro for free, you're going to want to say, okay, how do I make sure that I'm managing my tokens correctly? And the way to do that is to use these models for kind of planning, but try to use auto for implementing. And so the more you can get more information into the prompt, the better auto is going to be able to execute on that prompt. So now I press enter there, and we're going to see a few things. The first thing we're going to see is I mentioned this was a thinking model. And so I know it's a thinking model because you'll see this thought section. And you can click this and start to see what the model is thinking to kind of follow along. Some other things you would notice is these kind of bold sections. These are tool calls. Tools are just functionalities you give the LLM to call. So here it's reading these 4 files, right? You might realize that it's reading both front end and back end files. So it's getting a full overview of what it needs. It also looked at my Pi project, which defines everything. And now it's going right into the planning mode. So this is like a new UI we just built. So the model is writing out this plan. And this is a plan on how to add the price chart. And it's also going to create a to-do list for itself. Notice this is a .md file, so it's a markdown file. So you can edit this directly if you wanted to, right? If there's anything in here that you see that looks incorrect. Or you can go right here. It says steer the plan or add more details. You can have this back and forth with the model to fix this plan. Now, once you've agreed to this plan and you think this makes sense, all you have to do is I'll switch back to auto because now we have a detailed plan, right? So I can go to a cheaper kind of model. It's faster. And then you click build. It's going to say accepted plan. Then it's going to just start working through that plan bit by bit. So, okay, great. Now it's making edits. If I click any of these files, we'll see the edits that are being made. And you can kind of see the diff of those changes being made. And the model is just going to walk through this. while I was walking through this, I want to give you guys some background of how folks at Cursor use Cursor, right? So Cursor obviously is primarily used for engineering. And so a lot of the users are obviously engineers, but you'd be surprised at how many non-engineers are also using Cursor. For example, I sit next to somebody who's on our revenue team, right? And so they are used to using like, SQL to write dashboards in Salesforce, right? And they use Cursor to vibe code a dashboard that gives them all the financial metrics that they need by leveraging the fact that, hey, I know SQL, Cursor knows code. So how about I give Cursor my knowledge to help it write me a dashboard that shows me this code? And he was able to build this quite easily. And so there's a lot of these examples of people using Cursor to like build little apps, build dashboards that help them understand the things that they want. For example, you can use it to build architecture diagrams. If you're ramping on a new code base, you can say, hey, tell me about this code base, how it works. Create some mermaid charts for me, create some diagrams for me, for help me understand it. And so there's many ways of interacting with Cursor. Obviously, you get the most bang for your buck if you are writing code, but you can also vibe code dashboards and different apps that help you with your day-to-day, even for kind of non-engineers. Okay. So it looks like it was able to complete this task, right? We can see that we had our plan at the top. Then it had its to-do list. It's crossing this off as it goes. We can see all the files that it created and edited on the way. And then it gives me a little summary of everything it's done. And if I go back here and I go back to finance, press my page, I see that we have our dashboard. Awesome. And it is working. There is a few new features that we've added. And so I'm going to test one out as a kind of corollary. I haven't tested this before. It's a new feature. I'm just excited to kind of see how it works. And that is browser use. And so the idea is that Cursor can now use the browser to help test things. And so what I want to try to say is, hey, look at my browser and tell me what's wrong with this chart. Like you and I can tell that this scale is not going to work for stock charts, right? Because stocks aren't priced at $0. And so let's see if it can figure that out. I'm going to make this smaller so that if it opens the page, it'll have it. And now right here, it says connect to browser. I'm going to connect to my Chrome browser. I'm going to say at browser. Okay. Look at the price chart at, and then I'm going to give it the URL. And tell me and identify what UX fixes are needed and make them. Let's try that and see what happens. Okay, first thing, it wants to navigate to the URL. So I click run. Now it's waiting. I actually think it's using this page here. Let's see. So it wants to manage some tabs. All right, perfect. There it is. Now it's open this. There we go. Now it's navigating. It can't do it. So let me actually close this one. Browser, say internal browser. There we go. Let's open this up. And then let's go back. Here's how you actually go backwards in time. So here is where I started this. I can just go back to that, click enter, and now it's going to start over. Okay, now it wants to navigate it to the UI. Now it's going to capture a snapshot of this. Now it's waiting 3 seconds. Capturing another snapshot. Looking at the full page. So here we can see that it actually captured a snapshot of the page. So now it's paging down. Awesome. So it had the price chart. The button. So let's see what's going on here. Okay, so it says it can identify some issues, and now it's trying to make some changes. So let's see what it does. Okay, it added some better responsive behavior. That's right. And there it is. Let me improve the x-axis formatting. Perfect. So it's thinking about the x-axis. And let's see what it does here. So it knew that something was wrong with the x-axis, and it tried to improve it. It made better UX and better interactivity. I think it should have like done more with the x-axis, but at least we can see that it's able to actually look at the kind of site and make those changes. So that was kind of cool. And there's a lot of stuff you can do with browser to kind of help it test UI changes. The next thing I want to show you is MCPs. And so here, what I did is I copied and pasted um, uh, this ticket, but you can actually get this information with an MCP. But before I go into that, let me do a quick turn to the Q&A and see what we have here. So Billy's asking that he knows SQL, still learning Python. Is he right to assume that with Cursor, he can still manage the Python part, kind of just by understanding the basics? I think that's absolutely correct, right? Um, you can kind of vibe code and tell the agent what you want to be done, and it'll do that. And you can tell it what you know. It's like, hey, like I'm a SQL person. I know SQL. I want to like, make a server that runs this, execute this SQL commands. They can do that for you.
And then we have another question by Steven, who is asking about follow-up questions on the demo you showed thus far. So what's the process
Okay.
for code deployment and hosting? Does Cursor have any features to support this, or should code just be committed to a Git repo, for example, and hosted elsewhere?
Okay. And then how are databases handled with Cursor apps?
And
And
it's
is Cursor primarily for backend? Okay, perfect. So deploying code, you're onto the right point. This is going to be something that's in your Git repo. So Cursor is about writing the code and even reviewing the code after you've deployed it, right? So we have something called BugBot that will review your code. So if I have a PR like this, I'll get this kind of BugBot review if I have that enabled, right? And it'll even write description for me. But you will deploy the code. You can ask Cursor, hey, like write Git push, right? So Cursor can use Git to deploy your code, but it doesn't have any like, built-in things to do so. For databases, there are multiple ways you can interact with that. One is you can use built-in extensions in VS Code to work with databases. Another is you can use MCP. And so if I go here and I go to docs and I go to MCPs, and I go to directory, you see there's a bunch of things such as DuckDB, that's a database, right? InstantDB, MongoDB, right? So you can use these to interact with databases. Supabase is another popular one that folks like to use. So you can use it to interact with databases that way. And then as you saw that I'm actually using it for both backend and frontend in a monorepo, and it can get as complex as you want that way as well.
And then also Joe has a follow-up question on the y-axis. So he's guessing if you asked it to look at the y-axis, it would have done a better job. So it's best practice to be specific.
Joe, I think you are directly on the money. I think if I were to told it to the y-axis, and let's see what that does. Let me go back into agent mode. Okay, so I'm telling it to look at the y-axis and fix the issue. Now, of course, these are like kind of small changes, and so and actually let's also just use smarter model as well and just see what happens there. Of course, this is like a very simple task, and so I'm able to like save just these one-liners. But as you start to build more and more complex things, you're going to start doing what we did at the beginning, which is you're going to want to try to create a plan and break that plan down and have a lot more information. Perfect. I figured it out. So I looked at the y-axis. It says that it starts from 0, which doesn't make sense. It literally quoted me, and it was able to fix it. So that's perfect. So Joe, there you go. You solved it.
So we have another question regarding the version of the programming language, for example, Python or React. Does the knowledge cutoff of the LLM limit the usage of any latest features of the programming language? Essentially, can the LLM provide a code from a newer or different version of the programming language than what it was trained upon?
Great. And so you identified two key things. One is that the LLMs have a knowledge cutoff, right? That was the part that I talked about at the beginning, which is we can't change how the model has been trained. But I did mention we can change context. And so latest documentation on any API or any coding language, that's just context that the model needs to be aware of. So there are many ways you can give it that context. For example, I can do something like at web, right? Oh, sorry, it's already enabled. I can say like do a web search for the latest docs. I can give it a link. For example, here's my Y-Finance docs. I can give it this link and tell it to look at those docs. Or there's an MCP for that actually, and it's called Context 7. So Context 7 gives you up-to-date code documentation. And so it kind of does the same thing that I just showed you, but it does it for you. And so there are many ways you can get around like, oh, like I need to migrate from this current version to like the most latest version of like React or type Tailwind or something. And I want them all to be aware of that. You can just give it the URLs or directly tell it what to do or leverage MCPs. That's also something good to add in your rules, right? So in your rules, you can say something like, I'm using, let's go to the front end one. You can say something like, I'm using ShadCN version X, right? Or you can say, something like, for Tailwind, make sure that you are following the latest version of Tailwind and then give it the version. So then it'll start to think to itself like, oh, I need to actually look up what the latest version looks like. And then it'll search the web on its own. Any other questions there?
No, we're all good.
Perfect. So one other thing I wanted to show you is slash commands, which are like saved commands and going backwards. And so I can click this to restore. Restore checkpoint means delete everything you've done and kind of go back to this point. If I were to edit one of my messages, let's say I go down a bit more. Where's my next message? Right here. If I were to make a change to this and press enter, it asks me two things. Do I want to continue revert, which is the same as the last one, which means delete everything after this and keep everything before it, or continue without reverting. This is interesting. This means keep all the code changes that were made, but remove all the messages, right? So this is good when you want to start managing context. And so you realize that at the bottom, I have this percentage. This percentage is telling me how much of my context I've used. As you get close to 100%, we're going to automatically try to summarize the chat for you. Research has shown that as you start to like use more of the context window, the quality of the LLM degrades because there's so much information that it starts to get confused over time. And so that means that we all want to be very specific about managing context. And so to do that, there are a few things you can do. You can do something like I just showed you, which is kind of revert and like get rid of certain messages, but keep the changes. Or you can start new chats, right? New chats. The way I do it is like every one of these chat windows should be a isolated topic, right? And you want to use a different one for every single topic. So for example, if I was coding this feature today, and then tomorrow I want to code another feature, I wouldn't start from this part of the chat. I would start a new chat. However, let's say there's something in this chat you want to be available in this chat. What I would do is I'll tell the model to, hey, summarize everything we discussed and save it as a markdown. And then I would just reference that markdown with the @ symbol in this window, right? And that would be able to help. So that's kind of like a pro tip on making sure that you're managing your context window to get the best performance out of the model as well as speed. So let's revert here, go back. And now I want to show you slash commands. A slash command is like a saved prompt. And so I have this slash command that I can use, and it's called create implementation checklist. So this was before we created the plan mode. I would explicitly tell the model to create a checklist. And so the way that would work is in the .cursor folder, you create a commands folder. And in that commands folder, you add any of these markdown files. And these markdown files act as prompts. So here I'm telling it to, hey, create a concise implementation checklist and save it locally as a markdown, right? You can imagine this can also be something else. You can give it a persona. You can say, for example, hey, you're a tester. Your role is to write tests. And then you just do slash, and any of these thunderbolts are going to be your commands. And you can just add it to a prompt. So now I do that, right? I can press enter, and it's going to read my folders and then write a markdown, right? And here I have this kind of new markdown. And now that I have this markdown, you see it says something like phase 1 is the type definitions, phase 2 is the back end, phase 3 is the front end. I can say, okay, so that's done. I can go here. So now I have this context, right? I can go to these 3 dots and click duplicate chat. So now I have a copy of this information in 2 chat windows, and I can parallel my task. I can say, please work on phase 2 backend. And then in this chat window, I can say, please work on phase 3 front end. And now I'm going to have both of these models kind of like parallel working through this task, touching their files. And so because I had it create a checklist and they're separated by task, they're going to touch different parts of my code. So I don't have to worry about it. And here it wants to like run my server, but it's already running. So I can just click skip and that's fine. And now it says it's done with that part. And then for phase 2, it's finishing up here. Now it says phase 3 is complete, and this one's just writing a report. If I go back to my screen, you can see I have this price chart component here, but it hasn't fetched any prices yet. And I can tell it like, I can tell it I'm seeing this error on the front end to help it like fix it. That's another way you can kind of work with the models to kind of make these changes. It's having a hard time figuring out, but we're not going to debug that part right now. So that's slash commands. So now we know slash commands and we know MCPs, right? And so for example, I could have also just done, I'm just reverting these changes. I could have also started this way. I could say something like, what are my open Jira tickets? So this is kind of how you professionalize Cursor now. This is going to use my MCP talking to my Jira to start to tell me what I have available here. I need to enable it. If I go to my tools, toggle that on. Okay, it's all green now. Try that again. Perfect. So now here's all my Jira tickets. So it's able to see this same information here. All right. Now I can use a mixture of slash commands with that MCP to say something like create checklists or con to price chart, and then another slash command that tells it how to interact with that. So now I've kind of simplified that whole process, and now it's going to do multiple things. It's going to use Jira to pull all the information of that ticket, and then it's going to learn that it needs to create a implementation checklist of how to work with this feature. So it's making a directory docs, because that's where I said to save things. And it's going to write the checklist in the docs folder. If you ever see that it's taking like a long time, you can always click stop and just tell it to continue. Or you can just enter any message you want, and it's going to queue it, right? And you can always just push the queue, right? So you can interrupt the model at any point, and now it's created this checklist. Perfect. So now we're back at that starting point that we had. with the checklist, but instead all I did was slash commands and MCPs to get the whole thing started. What other questions do we have?
The only two outstanding ones are regarding the free access for UK students.
Give it some time to see if some more questions roll in. Any questions on context management, prompting tips, languages that it supports? Okay. Some other things I'll show you. And now we're starting to get into some of the more advanced features, right? Is going to be our CLI. And so if you go to our docs, actually, that's one thing I would mention. Check out the docs for sure. There's a lot of information here. And there's a lot of information in this new Learn section about AI foundational stuff. And then soon we'll be adding new things like, mindset, like I just went over, prompting models, context management, all the things that help you like use the best. So if someone asked about like documentation, this would be the closest that you get about videos on how to really get the best out of Cursor or just AI coding in general. So the next one is our CLI. CLI is going to be allowing you to use Cursor, but instead of using it in this chat window, you use it directly in your terminal, right? Let's get rid of all the changes we've made. And then you can follow these instructions. You'll install Cursor, and then you just run Cursor Agent to open it up. So I say Cursor Agent. Yep, and question was, does it work with C++? It does. Works with C++, Java, Angular, kind of all those languages that you would expect. R, and it works just fine with those as well. And so now I'm in the Cursor Agent. If I press slash, you can see all of the different commands I can run. I can choose which model I want to use. I can, resume a previous chat. It also has access to my MCPs, etc. And so here, what I can do is the same thing that I did in the UI. So just to show you how that looks, let's imagine that I copied something like this. I went to my terminal, I pasted that in. Here, it's just truncating it for me, so I don't have to see the full thing. You'll see that it does exactly what the IDE does. It starts to search through my files. It starts to use tools to read things. And then you're going to start to see how the code changes also look in this kind of experience. It creates its own to-do list, just like it did in the IDE. And now we can see all of the code diffs that it's making to try to make changes to the code. So this is very similar to the experience in the IDE. The only difference is that in the IDE, we could do things like click this to jump to the files, whereas here you can't. But I know some people like this kind of terminal experience as well. And so that's fully possible.
So Julia is asking if the cursor also works with C++, and I think that was just mentioned.
Yep, so Cursor does work with C++ and kind of other languages that you could expect. Okay, so here we see the terminal is just kind of working through all of these changes. In this sense, I just told it to do the full feature, right? So I'm breaking my rule of doing a plan, but I just wanted to show you how the terminal experience looks. One thing that's interesting is you could press Control R to enter review mode. So if I do Control R, here I get all the direct reviews of the code that was changed. And I can press left and right to kind of like see what those changes are. Here it's trying to run a command, so you can approve the commands that it can run. It just wants to make sure that it imported things successfully. I know that it has, so I can skip, and that's fine.
So we have a question
So,
from, sorry, we have
mhm.
a question from Sriram. Is there a way to amend the changes only after the human user has reviewed it?
So the way it works right now is all of these changes are pending, right? So they're in the code base, but they're not like accepted. You can reject them at any point in time. And so, for example, right here, I have like these kind of like diffs of the changes that were made. And so I can always just say like reject this change. And so you do have that human review component. It's easier to see in the IDE versus the terminal, but it also works that way as well. And here's our stop price chart. So it got the the y-axis correct, but the width is a bit short, but that's fine. You can always prompt it to fix that part. So that's how you can work with the CLI to make changes.
Okay, could you please explain how exactly the auto mode works in the agent?
Yep. So auto mode is a model we've trained that looks at your query, so whatever you write in here, plus any context you have, right? That's in the context. And it determines, hey, to do the thing that the user is requesting, which model out of the ones that we have available, right? Which model is going to be the best at doing that task the fastest? And that's what auto mode is going to do. The good thing about this is that unlike if you were using Claude for with thinking, if you were on like request or something, you actually pay more clicking this. Whereas if auto mode chooses it, you pay less. So auto mode is pretty good in that sense. All right. So I reverted all of those changes. Joe has a question. Does Cursor have a collaboration mode where me and let's say another co-founder can build together and I can see and distinguish uh, your edits from the co-founder edits? And so what you're describing here, Joe, would be a general kind of GitHub kind of workflow. It would be that, let's say I have this code. This code is saved on GitHub. What I would do is I will clone this repo, right, Joel demos, and I'll create a branch. So I'll say like, git new branch, and this would be like, Joe's edits. And then your co-founder would clone the same code and do the same thing. And you say like, co-founder edits would be the name of the branch. And so now each of you have your own saved version of the code and you can work through it. And then when you push it back to GitHub, it'll allow you guys to merge those changes together. And so that's how you guys would collaborate. So you collaborate through something like a GitHub versus through Cursor.
Amazing. Okay, sometimes I feel like cursor conversations are going down a rabbit hole. The context is helpful, but repeated back and forth often confuses the agent and it starts messing up. Any tips on how to avoid or recover from that while keeping the context? By
Yep. So the
anonymous,
best
actually.
the best way to do that would be the portion where I mentioned asking them all to summarize. So I would say something like summarize everything we discussed, focusing on any feedback I gave you, bug fixes, and edge cases. Right? I'll tell them I'll do something like that and save it as Markdown. And so now I get just the core information. And then when it does that, I will open up a new tab and add that Markdown file in here and branch off into a new chat. That's one way to recover.
Then Katie is asking, how do you use Cursor to plan and build out your backend? How do you prompt the agents or plan to incorporate the APIs to work on the front end?
Yeah. So for that, I'll do something similar to what I did earlier. I'd go into plan mode and I would describe what you want, right? And so in our case, I can say something like for the price chart, it had to do that, right? Because the price chart used Y Finance, which is an external library on the back end, right? And it had to interact with that API in the back end, and the front end had to call it. And so that's exactly what we did here with the plan mode, where I copied this information and I went to plan mode and I created a plan to do so.
Great.
Okay. As we enter into the last 15 minutes, feel free to let me know of any other questions. One thing I wanted to show you guys would be this link. So luma.com cursor community. I will give this to Zaria and she can share it with you. Here you'll be able to see any upcoming events we have, wherever they are in the world. And if you're around for any of them, you can attend. I think this will have things like hackathons as well as kind of videos that are recorded. So I'll share that. That way folks can kind of learn more. And then as folks mentioned, Right now, it looks like this is working only with .edu. So I'll talk to the team to figure out if we can get quickly the non US domains
And what
and
does the
see if there's any
offer for
problems.
students include?
So right now it says that includes 1 year of free Cursor Pro. And so Cursor Pro is going to give you extended limits on agents, unlimited tab completion. That was the autocomplete I showed you. Background agents. I'll talk about that shortly. And you get the maximum context window. So background agents is like Cursor, but in the cloud. And if you go to cursor.com/agents, you can do that. And so here I can access agent to create that price chart, same thing. And it'll show me all the changes it's doing. And it's doing this on its own copy of a computer on a virtual machine. And so you'll get like everything that I showed you today, you'll have access to all of that, including background agents.
Okay, so we have Jake raising the hand. Jake, could you just pose the question in the chat? Okay, now the hand has disappeared. All right. Maybe I would have one question as well. So I'm coming from a legal background, being no technical at all, but I have used Cursor for my PhD projects. And given that these vibe coding tools are now just making the coding much more accessible to not less technical people as well, what are the best vibe coding tips that you would share for people like us?
Yeah, so I would say the best vibe coding tips is to provide as much context as you can. The way I would think about it is whatever is in your head that makes you a specialist, that's the information you want to give to the model. And so if you know law and you want it to help you with law, you want to provide that context, either directly from your head or the resources that you know. So giving it website URLs to things it should know, and then it's going to answer questions in a much better way.
Amazing. Then you have how well does the image or multimodal work? Can you use it, for example, to change figures, graphs for data analysis, or is that tricky?
Nope, this would work just completely fine. And so you can go to image upload and you can upload screenshots and tell the model to make changes as necessary. And so, for example, um, for that price chart change that we had, there was actually a point where the model actually did take a screenshot, so it did just that. But you can also do it yourself by, just going here and taking your own screenshot and then passing that to the model. And I use that all the time. I use it for UI work, but you can also use it for data science. Here I have, say, Jupyter Notebooks, for example. Here I have a Jupyter Notebook that I had the model create. I could take a screenshot of this and say, hey, fix this y-axis for me. Or I can say, like, does this data look off and show it this? So that'll work just fine.
Amazing. Then Katie is wondering, how do you use Cursor to deploy to servers like GCP, so Google Cloud Platform?
Yeah. So the way it would work is imagine Cursor is the thing that helps you write, like, code. The way in which you deploy your code stays the same as it did before. So the exact same process that you use to deploy code to GCP, you will use it that way, and Cursor won't have any impact on that. If you deployed code with a terminal command, you can ask Cursor to deploy the code for you by running that same command. But I would usually deploy all the code on my own.
Great. Then Stefan is asking, can you share some more workflows we might not think of? For instance, can you automate writing unit tests?
Yeah, that's definitely completely reasonable. The way I would think about it is there are two ways to do that, right? When you think about tasks that you want done, you want to ask yourself two things. One, is this recurring or is it like just one off? If it's recurring, I can create a rule, right? And that rule can say new file testing.mdc, always apply, always write unit tests at the end of your tasks, right? Run the tests to confirm they pass. So I can do that, for example. Now I have this available. And then let's just imagine that I did this again. And let's say I just said, oops, let's enter too fast. Let's say I just said only work on the backend portion. Y finance, right? Let's imagine I did that. And so the idea is I want to see if it creates unit tests because of this context I have. Like I said, at testing.mdc. So now that's in the context. If I press enter, let's see what it does. So first it implements the feature with Y finance, makes its changes, checks its linter. It sees that it checks for test files. Now it creates this test.yfinance.com, right? And so boom, and now it runs the test, just like I said, to confirm it works. Now it's fixing its test. And so you can do it just like that. So the idea is if I want the model to always do something, I can create these rules that guide it on how to do work. And if I don't want it to always do something that's one-off, you just want to include that information in the prompt. And really, your creativity is the bounds here.
Great. Then Joe is asking, can we use Cursor to build agents? And could we clone or fork, if open source, other tools like Notebook LM and modify? In your experience, would that be better than building from scratch? For instance, I really like Notebook and LM, but it's missing some features that would make it much better, and I don't think there's an API for that at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty cool strategy. One thing I would say is if you're a developer, then yes, you can just kind of clone the open source repo and start using Cursor to make modifications. And that'll actually be really powerful because Cursor will be able to understand the code base and help you understand the code base. If you're not a coder, then cloning the repo will give you probably a lot of code, so it might be confusing. But that's definitely a workflow that you can use.
And Sriram is wondering, are there any publicly available MD files that contains the best practices and rules you have shown?
So there are public ones. I would say that the way rules work is kind of really based on yourself. But I think there is, if you do cursor rules and you just Google that directory, there's this popular one here, cursor directory. And this one has rules. And here you can get rules that are popular for your language of choice, web development, testing, whatever it is. And all you have to do is copy these into your rule folder. And so cursor.directory/rules.
Cool. Then we have another anonymous question. Some people rave about combining coding with Claude with Cursor. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, so Claude is a model provider. So they create the LLM. And so if I go here and I click Claude, I'm now coding with Claude. And so Claude is just one of the powerful kind of coding LLMs. And so you can select that model when using Cursor to kind of get the benefit of that quality. But you can also choose other models like GPT or Gemini or Grok with a K, etc.
And how big is the difference between different model providers in your experience?
So I think it is, so Claude 4.5, right? All the Claude 4s, for example, will give you the same quality as a GPT-5 High. So these are different model providers, but you get similar quality. GPT-5 High will be a bit slower. And then you get a little bit less quality with Gemini 2.5 Pro because it's now an older model, right? GPT-5 and Claude 4.5 just came out. And then the Grok models like Grok Code Fast, which is Elon Musk's XAI company, people have started liking those as well. But really, I would say that a lot of it is like style, right? The Claude 4 Sonnet model is the model that everyone jokes about is always like, you're absolutely right. Like like that's completely right. If you like that style of interaction, you're gonna like the coding with Claude, right? Because it's gonna make you feel like you're always right. Whereas like the GPT-5 isn't gonna say that. It's gonna be a lot more like terse. And so it really is gonna depend on your style.
Amazing. And given that we're approaching to the end, maybe just as the very last tip would be, there are plenty of people who have never used Cursor before. And what would be your advice to make the very first step into start to build whatever they have in their minds with Cursor?
Go to the docs, download Cursor, write down what you have in your mind, click plan mode, press enter. Do
Amazing.
that, that's going to set you off on the right spot.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Joel. That was absolutely brilliant. And thank you everyone for joining the session, for asking the questions. I hope this gave you a clear sense of how Cursor can facilitate and improve your coding. Maybe quickly about what's next at the King's eLab. In just 2 days in Cambridge, we're hosting Will I Am as part of the next Turing Tests conference, celebrating 75 years since Alan Turing published his Computing Machinery and Intelligence paper. The talk will be held in the chapel of King's College, which, as probably many of you know, was also the college of the Turing himself. Had he known where we'd be in 75 years later, he'd probably be very, very proud. The next Tech Stack workshop will take place in 2 weeks, and we'll be hosting Yao Kai Yang, founder and CEO of Moment, a no-code web application development tool that allows users to create custom full-stack web applications very easily. We've had this tool available on our hackathon last year, and it enabled especially less technical students to nonetheless build fully functional applications. Until then, stay in touch, get on our website. We will share the link that Joel was mentioning on the talk. And thanks again for coming. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.